our newest board member, Mrs. Jill Wilson.
Welcome. All right, we're going to go ahead and have our moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we're going to go on to the approval of the agenda. I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Since this is our first board meeting of the year, we do need to elect board officers for both the position of board president and board vice president for 2019. Do we have any recommendations?
You for president.
Second.
Thank you. Any other nominations? I appreciate that. Anyone?
Nobody else wants.
All right. All those in favor then of me continuing as board president?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. I will remain board president. Thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. So now we will go on to elect board vice president.
Madam President, I'd like to nominate Keller for vice president.
I second.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, then we have a nomination for Mrs. Kaler as vice president. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That motion carries 5-0. All right. Now we have our board positions for 2019. Thank you. All right, then we will go ahead and go on to our superintendent's report. Dr. Thomason.
President Reese, Vice President Kaler. Tonight we have one of my favorite nights of the school year, is the Point of Pride for our early childhood programs. So at this time, I would like to invite up Michelle Reese to recognize some of our Point of Pride for our early childhood programs. Michelle?
Thank you, Dr. Thomason. President Reese, Vice President Kaler, members of the board, members of our community, I'd like to welcome up Mrs. Patty Gleason, our Director of Early Childhood Learning.
Thank you so much. Well, we're very honored tonight and to present both of our schools. So we're going to start with Cooley first. And I would like to invite Julie Valek up to the front, please. Yay! Julie is one of our kindergarten prep team over at the Cooley site. This woman has been teaching in Higley for 10 years now. She's been teaching for 16 years total. And she is an amazing asset to our kindergarten prep team, well, to our whole school. Just the energy that she brings, the laughter that she brings, because she has a tremendous sense of humor, and the energy and just the love of the children that you teach every day. You have such a deep knowledge of early childhood, and the centers and everything that you prepare for the children in your class are just over the top. Every parent in your classroom, every child in that classroom is so happy and learning so much every day. What a perfect way to honor you today. Julie Valek. And that's for you. You're welcome. Okay. Oh, and then do they announce their family now or at the end?
After you announce the first four for your first school, and then we'll pass the mic down and they can tell us who all they brought with them.
Thank you, Dr. Thomason. Oh, and I want to also address President Reese, the governing board, and Dr. Thomason, and the cabinet, too. We're just, again, got a little ahead of myself tonight. We got some amazing people to acknowledge. All right, so our next point of pride is Christine Brown. Christine, will you please come up? Christine is new to our center this year, and she has had a very wonderful job, unusual as well. So she is the paraprofessional in our Mandarin immersion program. So she not only takes care of all the students, but she has 2 teachers that she works with as well. So in the morning, she's the para to Miss Sao, the Mandarin portion, and in the afternoon, Tiffany Bateman comes in and does the English portion. So Christine is the anchor and the constant in that class, and she has done an amazing job. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? It's been good, though. She comes with a very strong background in early childhood education, and we are just pleased that you're here, and you've just done an amazing job, and we wanted to make sure that you knew that today. Thank you. And we're very honored to acknowledge Miss Lauren Curtis. And I would like to call her teacher out, Carrie Burnett, to tell us a little bit about Lauren. Lauren, come on up. She's one of our kindergarten prep students. Thank you. All right, and now we're going to switch gears to Sossaman. And I would like to introduce Lauren Tesson. She's our point of pride for our certified staff. Talk about the cavalry with the white hat. And the little story, about 2 weeks before, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, before she was actually brought into our center, she was a sub for our district, and she came into my office and she said, Patty, I love your centers. I would love to come and work for you. She's like, Lauren, that's wonderful. We'll keep you in mind. Well, not, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks later, one of our staff had an emergency and had to leave. And Lauren stepped into the position and has not looked back. She has done an amazing job. She's one of our Brilliant Beginnings team and currently finishing her degree at Cortina. So we'll get her totally certified at the end of this year, and we're very glad. She has, again, just worked overtime to put her room together, to make the connections with the families, basically having to start everything all over again once she got there. But she did it effortlessly, and we're just so grateful to have you. Thank you. All right, and now I would like to introduce Nicole Camp. And we love to hire from within. I'll take a hug. So Nicole first came to us as a parent. Her daughter, Lauren, was in our Brilliant Beginnings class. Then she became the president of PTO. Then she came to work for us as a paraprofessional in our kindergarten prep class. And then when we were able to hire an admin clerk for the front office, Nicole stepped up to the job. So she's done about everything in our center and more because she constantly cares for all of the teachers, whatever they need, she's right there to help them with it. Her smile at the front desk didn't take her long at all to learn. I don't know, between her and Stephanie and Mona, they know probably 95% of the children's names when they walk in the door. They're able to address them. And what a great feeling for these parents with their little ones. They know their names when they walk in the door, so it's so great. And you just do everything we ask whenever we ask. Nicole, couldn't be any better. Thank you. Thank you. All righty. And then our student at Sossaman, I need Liam Inman to come on up and his teacher, Anna Stahl.
Okay, well, I am so proud of Liam, and I'm so happy to be able to bring him here today, and he is such an amazing student. And for any teachers out there that might have him next year in kindergarten and first grade and so on, you are going to be just as blessed as I am. And he shows a maturity level that is well beyond anybody of his age, and in some cases, my no, she's right. I meant to say myself, but actually, he is such a role model, and he is always kind to everyone, and I've never even seen him get frustrated or smile. Have you smiled? He actually always has a smile. He is so friendly, and I'm just so thankful for the Inmans, and I encourage them to keep having more so that you could fill my classroom. Okay, 7's not enough? No? So congratulations, Liam, you're awesome. Liam.
right, and then our volunteer point of pride. I need Paige Douglas to come on up. And Paige is our PTO president. And again, we are so grateful. She kind of stepped into the position after it was vacated earlier this year, and she has just picked up, and you would never know that it wasn't her job at the very beginning. She's made sense out of all the things that PTO takes on, and your energy, and you've been just tireless in the effort that you've given to us in the preschools. We're so grateful. She's a mom of our students at our preschool as well, so she's there on a volunteer basis all the time. And today, it's funny because if you've ever come to the early childhood centers, they're both very similar. So when I see a face that I normally see at Sossman over at Cooley, it's always like, where am I? You know, I have to take this down. But I've seen a lot of Paige at both centers lately. Paige, thank you. Thank you for stepping up and doing what you do, and for your energy and just the effort that you give every day. We're very grateful. Thank you. And would you start to tell us who you brought today?
Yes. I brought my husband, Ryan. He's there in the back.
My grandma and grandpa, my brothers, and my mom and dad, and my sisters.
Don't forget the sisters. Thank you.
So I have with me my husband, Tom, and my little one, Ben, and Austin.
And I brought my husband, Rob, and my daughter, Lauren.
Thank you all again.
Thank you, Patty. Tonight, we also get to recognize our points of pride from Higley Traditional Academy. So I'd like to invite Ms. Karen Bacon and Melissa Garland up.
Dr. Thomason, members of the board and cabinet, I'm Karen Bacon. I'm the principal of Higley Traditional Academy, and I'm so very proud. Yeah, woo! I am so very proud to recognize 4 very special people this evening who make a true impact on our campus. We have such an amazing environment, and that's because of the people who live in it. And we want to start this evening by recognizing probably a familiar face to Patty at the preschools, Kathleen Richards, who is our PTO president. She was instrumental on the PTO when her daughter was in preschool, and she continued on with that hard work with us. So Kathleen started with us as a kinder parent, wanting to know more about our school, and how do you do that besides getting involved in volunteering, right? So she jumped right in with both feet and got to know our families, networked, gave us guidance and feedback on what we could do to improve, to welcome families and give them the information that they need, because sometimes you forget when you're in it what people don't know. So she was really strategic, and I really am thankful for her guidance as a parent to help us improve. And she's organized so many amazing events, and she also is an actress at the theater. So she brings her creative talents and her way with words and communication, just amazing to our school. So thank you so very much for that. And then I'd also like to introduce our classified staff member, Carmen Smith. Carmen can often be seen. She has 2 children at our school. One now, that's right. I want to keep the other one forever. But she can often be seen walking to and from school with a wagon. Why? Because she carries so many things back and forth. She's always thinking ahead. She's always planning. She's a member of our PTO. She organizes all of our spirit nights. She's a go-getter out there in the community to make connections with our business partners. She was instrumental. We're getting a garden. We got a grant through the Dole Corporation and Bashes, and we're putting a garden. We were out planning today and measuring, and this lady had an idea and brought it to a teacher, and they together as a team put that in place. So we're so very fortunate. When you walk into our classroom, sometimes it's hard to determine who our paraprofessionals are and who our teachers are, and for that we're grateful. The level of expertise, caring about kids, and professionalism on our campus is just amazing. So thank you for everything that you do. And I'm going to introduce Miss Melissa Garland, the assistant principal at our school, and she's going to talk about our next 2 recipients.
Good evening. The next person I would like to recognize is our certified staff member. Our point of pride is Mary McGalloway. We coordinated today with our colors. Mary is a ray of sunshine at our school. She's also, I think, the glue that holds together a lot of things that happen. You've been there 17 years. Probably now the second longest, I believe. Is that right? Of anybody there? Okay, yeah, there's just a handful. And she's one of the few that has known everything about the school, and she's seen a lot of changes. And she's very welcoming to new staff members, and she cares about each person. And it's not just about being a student or a staff member. It's like she really takes time to get to know people and make sure that they're part of our school community. And thank you so much. Our last point of pride is our student. It's a 6th grader, Juan Pablo Martinez Hurtado. Would you come up, please? So when I announced to our staff that Juan Pablo won the point of pride, everyone was like, "Ah," because they've either had him in a classroom or they know what an amazing student he is. Some of the things that his teachers have said about him is he comes to school ready to learn. He's very ambitious. He's a great role model to others. He's part of our student council, making our weekly announcements, and he can be counted on to do the right thing no matter what. So when we promote RAISE at our school, which is what we use for our positive behavior, Juan Pablo is an example each and every day. Thank you. So now I'm going to let the recipients tell who they brought with them.
I brought my mom, my grandpa, my brother, and my friend Logan.
I brought my daughter Emily, my friends Amy and Dawn, and of course, most of my HTA family. Thank you guys for coming.
I brought my husband and my 2 boys in the back, and all of the, most of the staff from HTA2 came.
So I have my husband Scott, my two girls Gwendolyn and Amelia, and my parents in the back there. And a lot of familiar faces, which I was just going to say, HTA family, ECDC family, I'm happy to see so many friendly faces.
I just want to point out how creative we tried to be. Pop, point of pride, rocks, ha, get it?
We have one more very special recognition this evening, and I'd like to introduce Williamsfield Principal Steve Tannenbaum to make that announcement.
Thank you. Good evening. We'll have Jason Svedin come on up, and I'll tell you a little bit about our congratulations to him. So Mr. Savine just put down his, he was grading papers before we got here today, and that tells you a little bit about his commitment to his students. So Mr. Svedin just recently, well, end of November, received his national board certification. So for those of us who know a little bit about what it takes to get that certificate, it is a long, grueling process, takes about a year. Lots of tests, lots of time and commitment, and for him, it was a process that he started over a year ago. I've had the great honor of knowing Jason for 3 years. This is his first year here at Williamsfield. Jason's the kind of educator who I said, I'd love to have you teach some dual enrollment classes, possibly, in the years to come, and he said, great. And he finished his master's degrees in mathematics in 1 semester. He just did this in December for us as well. So he's also the same kind of teacher that said, I would love to teach maybe a Latin class sometime. I've been dabbling in Latin and some computer applications and maybe some AP, computer engineering design. I've been dabbling in that as well. He's just such an asset on our campus. He has really brought our math department along, teaching honors algebra as well as a physics course, because he just dabbles in physics as well. So we are very proud of him, very proud to have him as part of our family here, not only in the Higley District, but at Williamsfield High School. So I'd like to congratulate him and thank him.
for upcoming events, President Reese, members of the board, we do feel like we just got back from winter break, but Monday, January 21st is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so there'll be no school on that day. Followed by January 30th, we'll have our next governing board meeting that includes a work study, and that will be an exciting night. One of the topics included would be technology. And then on Wednesday, February 13th, we'll have our next governing board meeting at 5:30. And those are the upcoming events for the next month.
Thank you. All right. That was exciting. Lots of recognitions, and it's quiet now. All right. We'll go on to board comments. We did just return from break. Kind of hit the ground running. We've got lots going on. Any board comments?
President Reese,
Mrs. Wilson?
I just wanted to thank everybody on the board and all the cabinet who has made the transition so nice and easy for me, and just everyone who was able to meet with me and get me on board and get everything up and running so fast and quickly for me. So thank you.
You're welcome, absolutely. And thank you for taking on these next 4 years. Any other board comments?
President Reese.
Mrs. Kaler?
Several of us attended the breakfast with Mr. Doug Ducey this morning, and I was just happy to hear that he is still promising the 20 by 20, and he was boasting about his current budget going in on Friday, so we just need to keep watching that closely as the board, but it did sound encouraging that there's money there still.
Yes, it was good conversation for sure. Any other board comments? All right, then we'll go on to request to speak to the governing board. Mrs. Reach, do we have any requests? No? Okay. Then we will go on to consent agenda items, and I move that we approve consent agenda items 7.2 through 7.8 as presented.
I second.
Okay, I know that we have some conversation regarding, I know specifically some travel requests, and I think one of the conversations I wanted to just mention, we do have the request for Sossaman Middle School for their close-up trip, and I'm sure other board members as well as myself have received several emails from parents indicating there was a change on here, and they were upset with the board thinking it was changed, and I think it's important that we understand this is the first time the board is seeing this trip, and we have worked closely with Dr. Thomason, and I know that they've worked closely with site administration to make sure that this trip has been the best that we can do. And yes, there was a change prior to it coming to the board, and we apologize for that change, and measures have been put in place, hopefully, that we won't have a future situation like that. But I know as a board member, we've got some pretty upset emails, and I don't have an issue with the trip as it's presented, but I think from my standpoint, it's important that this is the first time understanding the board is seeing this trip.
President Reese.
Mrs. Kaler?
I totally agree with you. Just a couple things, and I talked to Dr. Thomason already about this, is that we just make it right with the parents for anybody who had put down a deposit or anything like that. We just make this right because we had that conversation that, it was not approved and fundraising was happening and deposits were being made. So that's concerning, but as long as we try to speak to those parents and make it right. And so thank you.
Madam President?
Mr. Glover?
I don't mean to pile on, but I will. Now, obviously some mistakes were made along the way, and I think it's just a good reminder that there are policies and procedures in place, and just having them isn't enough. You have to nurture these things and safeguard them. And I also want everyone to know it's okay to make mistakes. We just don't want to repeat mistakes. And everything is a learning opportunity along the way. So we're growing and always trying to get better. And I know Dr. Thomason and the cabinet are doing what they can to make everything all right again.
No, I agree with you. I think every opportunity can be a learning opportunity, and mistakes do happen, and we are human. And like you said, we learn from them, we grow, and follow the procedures in place. I think with that said, Dr. Fowler, I have a question on a newly added item for Higley High School wrestling. It's on our item that was added at 4 o'clock yesterday for this weekend.
President Reese, members of the board, I'm sorry I'm not familiar with this, so I'm just seeing it now for the first time.
Okay. Does anyone have information on this wrestling trip that just got added to our packet yesterday for this weekend?
Paul Howe called me yesterday at 3:15, indicating that some paperwork had been submitted, I believe, to him right before winter break. Somehow it had gotten misplaced and not turned into me until he called me yesterday afternoon and wanted to know, because the kids' trip was this weekend, would I go ahead and put it on the agenda? And so I did, so they wouldn't miss out on their competition.
Okay, thank you for that. So no one in cabinet, no one in administration has seen this trip. Everyone's seen it for the first time. And prior to winter break still wouldn't conform with our policy on when to request these times, because our last meeting was mid-December, so it would have had to be submitted early December. Okay.
President Reese, I know at the beginning of the year, we did do you used the best word for it.
We approved a lot of travel for championships across a lot of sports for this reason, so that if they continued to progress in their sport and qualified for playoffs and qualified for championships, that they didn't have to come back to us and ask us to travel. But my understanding is this is not part of that. This is an additional trip.
President Reese, members of the board, it looks like there's a dual meet classic that they would like to attend that's this coming up weekend, and it does look like the packet does have all the information together. But I would also say that from an administrative standpoint, that we would hold kids harmless for adult mistakes. I do believe there's some mistakes that occurred from adult perspective here, but we do not want to punish children or students for the mistakes of adults. And so we will go back and we will talk with the administrators and the individuals that were responsible for this and have that discussion with them, let them know the proper policies, procedures. If it is for a trip for students, needs to be in at least 3 weeks before the date of the trip.
Agreed. No, I completely agree that the kids should not suffer for that, and I'm sure they've worked really hard to be able to participate in that.
With that being said, I agree with President Reese says, but is there an administrator or somebody looking at this to make sure everything's in order before we continue with this?
We do have several checks that it has to go through. The first one is the site administration. It would go through the athletic director for an athletic field trip, and then the site principal for that, from that point. And then from there, it would be passed over to the director of secondary programs, Dr. Randy Mellowine, to put forward to Mrs. Reach to put on the board packet. And she is also checks it to make sure that it's complete and verified with all the proper signatures and forms that are attached.
President Reese. Yes, I don't want to punish the children for something that adults maybe dropped the ball on. And I do know that our Higley wrestling team is doing very well. Dr. Fowler can probably attest to that, that they are really winning awards left and right at competitions. So I'm very proud of the boys that are participating. However, I do believe we are coming up upon a field trip work study again soon. I think I saw that on our future agenda, and this is why. This is just another reason why we need to have everybody working together on the same page, making sure that we're following all the policies and procedures for field trips. I know that it becomes sometimes a headache for Mrs. Reach, and it shouldn't be for her either. So I appreciate you, Mrs. Reach, getting this on the agenda for the students, and I would not keep the kids from participating.
Any other questions or comments regarding the consent agenda? All right, then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0. And thank you for the follow-up on the process. All right, we are going to go on to our action and information items. The governing board has received the fiscal year 19 monthly governing board financial report for December of 2018. I know Mr. Holland's not here, but again, we appreciate him and his team putting this together. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we will go on to 9.2 stipends.
President Reese, members of the board, at this time I would like to welcome up Mom Martins to give us a little information on some of the district stipends and extra contract pay. Mrs. Martins.
Good evening, President Reese, members of the board, my fellow colleagues, as well as the Higley community. I'm here today to briefly talk about and give you information related to the stipends / supplementals that we have here at the district. And I'll use that word interchangeably because culturally here at the district, we tend to do it. I would say that on average, they use the term stipends more often than they use the term supplementals, but I'm trying to shift that thinking and use supplementals a little bit more because it's really what it is. So pretty basic, supplementals are what individuals get here at the district that is outside of their regular job classification in terms of duties worked and pay. And whatever we do that's outside of their work agreement, their contract, we offer supplemental pay for. Well, I'll take that back. We don't offer pay for everything, but we try to offer pay for what we can in terms of the work that they're doing that we feel that we can afford to pay. And then maybe over time, individuals that we can add other supplementals or other stipends for. But what we do know is that all of our employees go above and beyond their jobs and their responsibilities, and we thank them for everything they do. And this is just a small piece of that extra appreciation, if we can, monetarily in that bigger picture. So every board meeting in the consent agenda, you guys approve the supplementals and you see them labeled out, and there are many line items in relation to this. So these are the examples of what we do offer out currently, and the only ones that I did not put on there outside of what you see in terms of sports, activities, leadership, professional development, hard to fill, NBCT, I'll go on to the next slide in a little bit, are supplementals for our classified, because those work a little bit differently. they are extra pay for work done, but it's typically similar work to what they do. It's just that it's outside of their work agreement time frame. For an example, if you have a 10-month employee who typically works the week before school starts in July and goes until the end of May, if there's a project that we need them to work on to stay late or come early, because it's not part of their regular position, we pay them the same rate of pay unless it's something completely different. And we offer a supplemental and say, it's not going to exceed 10 hours, so we'll pay you your hourly rate of pay for those 10 hours for that time period that you're going to do that extra project. And some examples of that sometimes is setting up at some of the high schools for coming back. I think we call them Kingdom Days and Black Hawk Days, and getting all of that set up so that way we're prepped and ready to go for the school year in terms of registration, knowing your classes, etc.
Ms. Martins, I just want to add something so when you guys are reading the financials, I noticed some of them say NTE, and I had to ask what that meant because, anyway, it's not to exceed, so that's what you're talking. If you guys are reading those and you see NTE.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Absolutely. And it's usually because what we've identified in terms of the budget and what we think the work is going to be, that it shouldn't go over that amount. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ranges in which we pay for those various items, but some of the other things that you'll see when we're offering those supplementals for our various employees related to the next slide in regards to tutoring, homebound services, testing, teacher coverage, is that we also have summer school, Saturday school. Sometimes our employees will cover different events like dances or other extracurricular type things that are happening on those campuses where we need extra chaperones or we need other adults around. And so our various employees will help support those because otherwise they can't happen, right? If we don't have the right security or if we don't have the right chaperones for that ratio of student to adult, things can't happen, and we don't want that, especially when our students work really hard to put on various events or dances and things of that nature. I think back when my high school days, even though it was 20 plus years ago, how exciting that was to have homecoming, I don't, do they do the Sadie Hawkins anymore? But Sadie Hawkins, things of that nature. So we always want to make sure that we're ready for that. And then, of course, if we have employees who need to work during the breaks, our certified employees are contracted to have off during those time periods, but sometimes we have times where for our Title I schools, we need extra tutoring services or we need other services in which to help support our students during those time periods, so we'll offer supplementals for those areas too. But these are a majority of what you're approving when you see these. So I think the next slide in regards to rates for supplementals is probably going to be maybe the more controversial slide, for lack of a better word. So they vary. These supplementals come out of district funds, M&O, and they also come out of tax credit. So each school or site has a site council that's identified. They work with their site administration, and that site council, made up of parents, teachers, other employees, identify what they're going to pay for and how much they're approximately going to spend for that site. And it can vary. As you guys know, no two sites are the same. They operate a lot of times very differently in terms of culture and what's popular at their site. For example, STEM might be big on one site and not big on another site. And so the various clubs and the various opportunities can change from one campus to another campus. And we give our site administration the autonomy to decide what makes sense in terms of pay, leadership, etc. The ones that don't, although we've set some parameters around, primarily that we have are our athletics and our activities around the middle schools and the high schools. So we have a rate sheet in which we offer a certain point factor. It's a percentage of a base amount of about $36,000, in which, depending on the activity, we think warrants this stipend. As I said earlier, a lot of times the work far exceeds the amount of money that's paid, and we appreciate that from our team, but we try to put some consistencies towards this. And so if we find activities that are similar in these capacities, we try to then pay similarly at those different sites, especially if it's a new new activity, new club that's been identified that hasn't been established before. So we try to find some consistency if at all possible. But we also know, especially when it comes to tax credit, there's only so much funds that are available, as well as with certainly our district M&O budget funds, there's only so much funds that are available too, and that's why we have to put parameters around them. One thing that was, I know, something that the district really appreciated was a few years back, maybe more than a few now, maybe 4 or 5 years back, the board had approved leadership stipends for the elementaries. So that's something that each elementary site is able to identify on their site to be able to give out, and that can vary too based on the site leadership. For example, one site might say that, you know, I have a SPED leader who reports back to the site and the campus, and actually this year we gave them to all of our SPED team leads, but in the past that wasn't necessarily the case. But it could be a situation like that where they're a lead of some kind within their department. They have a chair responsibilities similar to the middle schools or secondary levels. So they're identified in leaders in different ways, or there's a leadership program on their campus, and those that are involved in that leadership program from the certified capacity can qualify for that leadership component. But those are, again, percents based on the total salary. And unfortunately, we've not been able to, because of cost and funds, you know, last year the board approved a salary increase to $40,000 as our base. So our supplementals don't take a percentage off of that, but that is something we hope to change in the next few years. But as you know, baby steps, one step at a time, in terms of not biting off more than what we can chew. So, and then really the last slide I have, and what I anticipate is questions that you might have, but that's essentially what we do and what we have.
I do have some questions. In reference, if you could walk me back to events, who makes the determination that we're going to award stipends?
It's typically the site administration. So if it is some special event that's happening, let's just say at one of the elementaries, so the site administrator will determine the potentially amount of work, what's needed, if they have money in their funds, whether it's something that they got from district or if they have tax credit.
Because I see a lot of sports stipends in reference to security and things like that. We have a large event which has become a tradition here in Higley, which is the Fine Arts Festival. I see your staff and teachers putting a great deal of hours into this, yet they receive nothing. So, I mean, you have this huge program. Fine arts is very important to this community, yet we see no validation to talk to these people and give them anything. So who is determining, like, okay, you have a fine arts festival that draws thousands and brings all this to our district, and yet you have a sports program and we give them a stipend. So who's making this decision here? I'm just kind of curious. I don't want to put you on the spot, but, but I see this huge program, and these teachers are meeting after school and all these things to make, and they do a wonderful program, and yet nobody's giving them anything. So really, why should they do this? I'm asking. I mean, it's really sad to see a huge program like this, and it's out of the kindness of their heart that they're doing this. And if we want this to continue in this community, we have to validate the importance of this, and we're not validating this. I'm just kind of curious. Who's going to have this conversation, or why aren't we having this conversation on that?
President Reese, members of the board, I would like to chime in if it's okay with Mrs. Martins. On some of those situations that they do come up is that, first off, we have to find a funding source for our coaches. If we had to pay the coaches hourly, we know that they would make much, much less than the minimum wage because they put in tremendous amount of hours. And I'm not saying that coaches are more important than our arts teachers or individuals of that nature. There's just, quite honestly, not enough money to go around. And sometimes when it's a district-sponsored activity, we have even less opportunities to help pay for those individuals, because a lot of times those individuals that go above and beyond, and a lot of them do for different clubs, sports, and activities, are paid through tax credit funds. So when tax credit funds come in, they're given to the site, and they are not dictated at all by the district office. They come to the site and they're dictated by the site level. And so we don't have an opportunity from a district point and a district standpoint to pay individuals to come up to do a district type of activity. We could look at some different funding options like gifts and donations and take a look at that. And that's definitely something we can do. But I know that many of our teachers put in a lot of extra time and effort that we are so grateful for. I wish I could pay them all what they're worth because they're putting in a tremendous amount of effort. But that is something that we can definitely look into for individuals. But then we would go back and we would see the compensation rate that we have. And I'd say the Fine Arts Festival would be like some of the stipends that we have for some of our high schools for our dance competitions or some of our choir events in that aspect too. And then some of our middle schools that have events too. And we can take a look at that to see if it's in there and see what funding source we can find to help pay them and move forward on that. But I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with you.
I would like to get some more information in reference to that as far as where we're going to go, because like I said, this is a huge program, and it's just on the back of the teachers that the kindness, and this kindness group might move on, so what are we going to do? And it's just, which takes me into coding and robotics are so important. I don't see it in all our schools, whereas it should be across the district, because in the Jobs for the Future, coding is for everything. So how does somebody determine any money for the teachers? Because I don't see every school stepping up, or I don't see Girls That Code programs in all our schools. Who takes the initiative to say, okay, we need to do something like this and subsidize it? If everybody's doing it individually pockets, then we're going to have such a variation in such important programs like this. So, and also, are we not paying them enough in stipends for people to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in doing the robotics program, I'm interested in doing the Girls That Code program? Because I don't see that happening right now. Is that what's where we're at? Or?
So interestingly enough, we had a healthy dialogue about this in the fall at one of the elementary principals meetings where the principals and assistant principals were present. And we talked about the leadership stipends, and we also talked about, should we identify, for lack of a better word, some benchmark programs across the district? One of the principals said, could the district identify them for us and tell us? The challenge with that, and then we continued with the healthy dialogue in cabinet, is that each population is so different. Where coding could work on one site, I'm just going to throw out bridges, and it may not work at another site like Santan.
But I don't want to interrupt. Coding is, for this next generation, is a must. So it doesn't matter whether Bridges is okay and maybe Santan's not. Santan's fine for coding too. Okay.
No, I'm not.
I think that's where that conversation should be. There should be a benchmark. It should not be up to that individual site, because I believe every child in this district should have access to coding and robotics and things like that, because that's just the future to prepare them in reference to that.
And President Reese, members of the board, I would also like to say too that we do have coding on every one of our elementary campuses. We do have the hour of code, and we do have code within our media program. And I think that what Mrs. Martins is talking about is some of the after-school clubs and responsibilities from that aspect. So we do have coding that is part of our curriculum within the school setting. But I believe what we're talking about with the stipends and extra duty pay would be some of those clubs and activities that happen after school or before school and weekends.
Absolutely. Yeah, what we're talking about today is not curriculum related, it's outside, again, outside of their primary classification, so it's not related to their regular school day. But I don't disagree, Mr. Witovich. These are areas that are trending and that are popular, but it's also a struggle for a site if they don't have the student participation on one site as another site does. I will say across the board, I think all of our site administrators do a wonderful job in making sure that they assess what the interests are on their campus, whether it's the interest that's being brought by families, students, or their own employees, and they give it a try. I've seen in the year and a half that I've been here, sites where they try out a program and maybe they just have a couple of participants, give it a try, see where it goes, and see if it'll build a little bit more. Or the teacher I've seen who's tried to build a program and garner some interest and haven't been able to do it. So it really varies. And as much of, I know for me, it was a shift in thinking and ways. But the reality is it is very different at each one of the sites in our population, in our culture, in our communities that surround each one of those sites. So not that these aren't big picture items where the nation is taking us, but it's also what we have to decide, because with only so many hours, so many opportunities, so much funding, what are going to be successful, but it doesn't mean we can't pilot something and then see how we can grow that or how we can garner more participation in the bigger picture. And those are some of the dialogues we can continue to have, absolutely. And I think some sites do struggle because, you know, like Stuco, you think Stuco would be something that's big on each site, but it varies itself too, depending on the location in relation to that. But that naturally seems like a given, but what I've heard is it can vary.
So, Ms. Martins, if I may, so I'm going to put the tax credit stuff aside because I think that's out. But in your opinion as HR, is it a best practice for schools to decide the various levels? I mean, I think what would help me, and it's not included here, but I think it exists. There is a sheet that says if you are a varsity coach, you're
Correct.
here. If you could maybe, if that would help, I would love to see what's where, because we see them when we approve the financials, and I'm always like, oh, we pay for that, we pay for that. So that would help if you don't mind sending us that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely
again, back
provide
to my other question though, is it, if we're talking about like a first grade chair, I would think that you would want that to be consistent across the district. So is it, the things you were talking about that you're giving them the autonomy to decide, is it what's the best practice, you think?
So everywhere's different. I would say it's not necessarily right or wrong, it's just different. One thing that I personally, if you're asking my personal opinion in relation to the HR work that I've done, I've been doing HR work for over 15 years. There's typically some benchmarks, some norms, like here are a cluster of different activities that should be happening in the bigger picture. But as I came here, and I don't think it's bad, like I said, it's just a different component in terms of culture for me, is that a lot of our sites do have a lot of autonomy. But I think it's also great because they know their sites best. So what I feel that I do is that when there's a topic or an item, I'll consult with that site administrator and say, you know your site best, you know your employees best, let's dialogue about how this could work or how this can't work, and let's figure out a solution that's gonna be best for you. And I'll start along those same lines in that same conversation with another site, but it might end up a little differently. And I think, you know, as we know, again, not only are no two sites the same, but no two people are the same. So you're gonna get various perspectives on how this works, and some of this comes from deep-rooted, again, not right or wrong, just different from my perspective, deep-rooted perspectives in where they grew or how they developed, and what they take with them here in terms of their learning and their knowing in the bigger picture. But I do know that one of the things that our site administrators appreciate is that as a district office, we give them the autonomy to control what they need to do, what's best. And I'm not saying that there aren't some things we can still refine in the bigger picture, but I think I personally have to understand more of our culture and demographics before I can help lead in the right direction. But it is different, but I also, as a reminder, I come from higher education, not pre-K through 12.
You know, when you say autonomy like that, okay, so you've got a leader at one school that has the initiative and out there and seeing what's happening across the state and the country and taking the students at that school to that level. Then you have another school that maybe that person doesn't have a vision for state and things like that. So we're, you know, that's my, I'm not comfortable with the word autonomy and let them do their own thing because, you know, as I said before, I believe in every child in this district should have as much things possible to them, equal.
Sure,
So,
and let me clarify what I mean by autonomy. I think you've heard me say multiple times when I've had opportunities to speak to you, is that our strategic plan and our goals, our mission, our values drive what we do as a district. I know that Dr. Thomason, Dr. Schillingberg, my other colleagues on cabinet, Dr. Mallerwine, Ms. Sherry Richards, Dr. Fowler, Mr. Holland, we all make sure that all the work we're doing matches our mission, vision, and our strategic goals and initiatives, because otherwise we don't have the roadmap to do the work that we need to do. In terms of how each site decides to carry out that mission and vision and strategic plan, I do know, although I have not been there recently, Dr. Schillingberg and the Ed Services leadership team does a great job in communicating that at their monthly administration meetings. And they talk about the work that they could do and model that and how they could bring it to their campus to support all of those different perspectives. But sometimes it's a matter of, we might say, I think a good example might be as part of this year's initiatives, Ed Services came up with this wonderful idea to spark creativity and motivation related to the strategic plan, that each campus come up with an idea that's going to support it, and there's going to be a little mini contest, and based on that mini contest in relation to this plan that's going to support one of those initiatives, we'll then be able to financially support part of that. Right? And so each place is going to come up with their own niche of what strategic objective is something that they should focus on their campus, and how they're going to initiate that game plan to present as an idea to market, to hopefully be that winning plan and get the money. And what I'm hoping, and I think what the educational services team is hoping, is that everybody, when they start getting their juices going and they're thinking about this and they're getting creative on their campus, they're building motivation, will all want to carry out these ideas still, and maybe there's going to be other funding that could help that, or there's other things that we could do to do pieces of that in the bigger picture. But I think that's kind of what I mean by some of the autonomy. But we all have a roadmap, and if we're not following that roadmap, that's our first concern, and we should address that. And like I said, I don't know when I don't talk about that roadmap, when I talk about the big picture.
President Reese, members of the board, I would also like to say too, from a district standpoint, we do have a minimum set of standards and requirements for each of our schools. But we also know that there are several individuals within our school district that go above and beyond those standards and rules and what they have. And we are very grateful for them. Once again, I want to go back to say I wish, and with the support of the board, every year we do have more and more stipends we give out. I'm sure those members that have been on the board, President Reese, Mr. Witovich, you see more and more standards, more and more stipends that are put on our list every year, and we continue to grow those because we want to value those individuals and those teachers. But you will always have some autonomy of individuals that go above and beyond our minimum requirements and minimum standards. Some of our coaches don't coach for just a season. If they're a coach for their sport or their activity, they're planning and moving forward 365 days a year moving forward, and we are grateful for that. But unfortunately, because of the costs and the funds that we receive, we're not able to reward them the way we would love to.
So, and I know I know Mrs. Kaler's trying to get in here. I know there's a lot of conversation that wants to happen, and we will. And I'm going to try and do some kind of clustering, if you will. Like, my response with Mr. Glover's comment is he's asking if it's best practice on letting each site determine. I guess where I would go is, do we, I'm not going to call it a job description because that's not really what it is, but do we have a description of, like, a kinder chair, first grade chair? Do we have a description of what that is? What does that mean? What is the expectation of those additional roles? Because I agree. I mean, I agree that they should be compensated for doing some of these additional roles. And I know having the chairs, the department heads, excuse me, all that came in as we had more conversation on, from the elementary schools, the early release Wednesdays and the professional learning communities, and who was attending meetings to take it back to their sites and things like that. And I know, like you said, we have seen more and more stipends and supplementals come into play, and more sites are doing that. But do we have a basis description of what these are, and a typical compensation amount? Because the way I look at that is, you're right, every school is different, all of our communities are different, we are in this small area, but you go from one school to another and the dynamics are very different. But where my concern comes in, and I think this is kind of where Mr. Glover was going, if I have a first grade chair at one school and a first grade chair at another, or team lead, and do they know what their expectation is of that role? Is that expectation similar? Because what is that? And then a recommended compensation. And I agree, I think the school should have some say in it, but then we're also dealing with the example of Bridges may get a whole lot more tax credit than Gateway. Sure. And then I have two teachers who are doing, I'm not going to say the same, but they're both team leads of their grade level, and meeting, they need to know what's expected of them as that team lead. And one may be being compensated way more for another. And I know this isn't going to sound right, but it's just an example, and I know our teachers don't do this. But if they're both doing the expected role of a team lead, they're both doing that, but they're being compensated differently because they're at different schools and they have different funding sources. Is that a best practice?
That should not be happening. So my understanding and what I've communicated at the beginning of last school year and this school year, so I'm going to first start with our elementaries. So at our elementaries, like I said, I think 4 or 5 years ago, the board had approved leadership stipends. So with that approval came duties, functions in which we anticipate or we expect those leaders to do to be able to be eligible for those stipends. And those are all $1,000 stipends. So if they've been identified as a leader based on that criteria that we identified and the board approved, they should be getting that $1,000. And that's across the elementaries. They each have X number, about I think 8 to 10, that they're able to pick from to fill those roles. At the high schools, it's listed also for chairs, so they have expectations in terms of their duties that they're supposed to do if they're a chair, and there's a set funding dollar amount. They qualify in different areas based on the number of faculty that are in their department, and those are set amounts too. I will say for the most part, I believe we set very similar criteria in terms of dollars. The part that becomes, for lack of a better word, unstable is the funds used through tax credit than the ones that we've identified as district-wide stipends or supplementals or leadership components. It's the tax credits to where, like you said, a Bridges might have a ton of tax credit and a Gateway Point may not have as much. So they don't have the opportunities maybe to expand beyond their 8 to 10 leadership stipends at their campus like Bridges might be able to. But in terms of common areas, for put it in quotes, there are set standards. And even with the tax credits, we have put out some recommendations, and we clarified those recommendations late fall, primarily again at the elementary level, because the secondary level, most of it is within the activities list that I'll provide Dr. Thomason to provide to all of you. They're more defined. The elementaries have probably been evolving as we've evolved the things that we've wanted to do in the time period that we've been here.
President Reese, so I was talking with Dr. Thomason about this the other day, and I understand a lot more about how stipends are working. One of my issues, again, it goes back with maybe what Mr. Witovich said, is, my mom always said this to me, life's not fair. Okay, I get it, Mom. You don't have to keep telling me that. But I just think some of these stipends, we need to get them more fair. And that was my issue, is when I'm seeing dollar amounts and things flying. I recently heard that there's a stipend being offered for a one-night international event for $1,000. And I don't know where that money's coming from. I don't know who picked that dollar amount. I don't know the background, but that's going out to our staff, offering that. And then coaches who work 5-6 months, hours and hours and hours for a wrestling, or, they get paid $2,000, and they're seeing that too. So I think if we're going to value teachers and we're going to value people, then those kind of things need to be better explained as they're sent out. Because I sit here and wonder, well, why would one night event be worth $1,000 to one student or to one staff member organizing it, versus a 2,000 stipend for an assistant coach for wrestling and or track or diving or whatever. So that's my concern with stipends, and I think that's where I kind of wanted to ask and have these conversations, is because I know it's not fair and it won't ever be perfectly fair, but I just think we can be more fair if we can just look at those things very carefully and make sure that we're not sending out things that are devaluing people. So that was my concern.
Sure. And I'll have to, that surprises me, Vice President Kalar, so I'd have to defer and talk to my colleagues and ask them, because that's new. I have not heard that.
So who is the stipend coordinator in the district?
So other than the ones that we have listed, it varies. So Dr. Fowler oversees all the athletic stipends at secondary, as well as the activities. In regards to the stipends in which we have for the elementary school sites, as I said, I send out the information from Human Resources at the beginning of each year related to the leadership stipends. And then, as I said earlier, I want to say October, November, we talked at one of the site principals meetings where we talked about what is the standard, how should we apply these stipends to things that are not as clear and that are part of their tax credit component. And so we dialogued about that, and my understanding is Human Resources sent out something prior to my arrival, my predecessor a few years ago, to kind of have the standardization, but we've had such transition, not everybody understood that, so we communicated again after that meeting, that here seems to be a process and a formula that matches everything else and works.
So who checks this, that a robotics teacher at Bridges has the same stipend as the robotics teacher at Santan? There's nobody checking this? Somebody could be making 2,000 and somebody could be making 1,000? Nobody, there's no
I will tell you,
chart?
everything comes through from the site administrator, Human Resources. I ultimately approve it going forward too, but I don't pull out a spreadsheet to see that the robotics one is getting the same one at Bridges as it is Santan in terms of that example. I'm just looking at what are they doing, what is it for, what funding is it coming out of, and does it match the same dollar amount as other areas? But they don't always say, you know, like this is this many hours versus that many hours, et cetera. So.
President Reese, members of the board, we did set some minimum standards for all stipends in those areas. We do know that a lot of teachers go above and beyond that, but when we set stipends, we take a look at approximately a minimum standard of hours at a rate of about $25 an hour. And so that is something we tend to look at closely across the district on stipends. We know that, and we set that up for some of our site stipends, about 40 hours a year would be about $1,000. We set that out for the individual elementary stipends. We do know that many of our teachers go way, way above and beyond that too, but we did set up minimum requirements, and that was the approximate rates and standards that we had, not just for the stipends at the elementary school, but at the high school and some of the other areas too.
So if Dr. Fowler's doing the athletics, I'm still confused who's overseeing that these benchmarks are being made in the academic side. Okay, that's what I'm trying to.
No, I think if I understand your question correctly, as Dr. Thomas said, and what I tried to say was that we have these standards in which everybody tries to do, but I will be honest and share, you know, this topic came up that day. One site might not get as much tax credit dollars, so they might have somebody who wants to do, I'm just going to use STEM as an example, it's not specific, but they might have somebody who wants to do STEM, but because they only got $200 in their tax credit, they can't pay above a certain amount for certain things. So certain things they ask for volunteer basis. And those are, again, ones outside of what our standards already are, but we still establish standards on this is what we think you should pay, as Dr. Thomason said. We think this matches up with this work and this dollar amount. But again, it'll vary depending on the money that they have. But ultimately, everything does come under HR, and I ultimately approve it.
I understand, but we have a gatekeeper for the sports, but we have no gatekeeper for the academic. That's just my concern here. See.
Yeah,
Maybe we could have a work study in the future, you know, for a time. That is a concern. So how are we guaranteed any of this funding across the district here? I'm just confused here.
So President Reese, members of the board, like I said, when it comes to tax credits, it does get very confusing, and it's not a fair issue. If we have one school that wants to have a robotics club and they've brought in $400 worth of tax credits, roughly that is 16 hours for a sponsor to run that. Do we just say, okay, we're running it for 16 hours and then we're quitting it because we don't have any more tax credit for that program after school? All of our teachers are going above and beyond. They really are. And we do try to set the standard of approximately $25 an hour. They, from their own hearts and souls, are giving much, much more than that. Because one school brought in $2,000 worth of tax credits and one school only brought in $400 worth of tax credits. It is a difficult situation that I have to deal with on a regular basis. It is not an easy one.
I understand that part, but there's nobody overseeing this. That's maybe I'm getting confused here.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So the example of Mrs. Kaler's stipend that's out here that is being offered, if you will, you're going to, like, it comes to you and you're going to approve it because it's after the fact. I mean, like, these stipends, whatever this one may be, it may be, but you're getting it after the teacher has been told, a lot of times after the work's been done. And so really you don't have an option. You have to approve it. They were told that, they were promised this, they've done their share. We don't have a choice but to pay it. And I agree. I've heard you. Our teachers go above and beyond, and they do so much and everything. But then I think what Mr. Wojtovich is saying, so this stipend's out here somewhere being offered somewhere, somehow, whether it be tax credit. Who's monitoring that to say, hey, whoa, time out. What are you doing? I need to know that whatever you're doing, whatever you're offering, whatever you're putting out there is worth this $1,000 stipend before it goes any further. Because it may be a site that has that money to offer, but I think that goes back to Mr. Glover's point is you're going to get it after the fact, and Mrs. Kaler's point of what message does that send, that we have this teacher who's working really hard. They all do. I'm not saying that. And doing that robotics club for the $200 and doing the 45 hours or whatever it may be for that $200. But then you have this other stipend out here that's out there. And who's approved it? Who's agreed that that's a good idea? And I can only speak for myself, but it seems like the direction of this board is we need to be more proactive. And when we don't have that gatekeeper, when we don't have someone monitoring this, everything's reactive. We have to react. So you have this out there, no one's approved it except maybe a site leader, and no one else knew about it. And I think you would agree with me that you have a $1,000 stipend out there for a one-night event, which may be an amazing event, but you have these teachers doing homebound services who are doing 50, 60, and we all know more hours than that, getting 1,500 in over the course of 3 or 4 months. We know that this happens. Then we're reacting to it. Then we're trying to calm people down. Then we're trying to put out fires. Then we're trying to figure out what happened. How did this happen? How did this happen? We keep coming back to how did this happen? What went wrong? How do we fix it? Then we're having to put things in place not to go through this again. And I agree, it's all a learning experience. But at what point do we become proactive versus reactive? And I think that's what Mr. Ratovich is saying. We have someone kind of proactively looking at our athletic stipends and trying to keep it somewhat under control and as equitable as we can, but then we have no one else monitoring all this other stuff. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And whether the funding source may be M&O, whether the funding source is tax credit, we have thousands, tens of thousands, I mean, it's thousands per board packet that people aren't monitoring proactively, and we're looking at it reactively.
I have a better understanding of what you're trying to say, Mr. Ratovich. Thank you, President Reese. I would hope, and I don't know if Ms. Richards is here today. Oh, Sherry is here. Sherry, can you or Dr. Mallerwine speak towards this?
He wants to talk first. Shock.
I've never heard of an international one-night event stipend, so I think that might be just hearsay. That doesn't. From who? Like, I've never heard of it. I would love to see that. So that could be a grant or something that came from totally somewhere else, but that doesn't come through us. Here's what I know about stipends. The stipends that we've talked about, I think there's two things that are colliding here. There's stipends that have been set, and there's been levels set, and that has all been passed for team leads all the way down to elementaries, and those have been leveled according to how much work they do. And we've all talked about that, and that's been vetted. The tax credit is not dictated by any of us. It is decided by site council. And so we don't control some of that. As far as the gatekeeper of that, that's why we hire principals, is to do that. And that comes through us. Those conversations happen with us, and we try to keep it equal everywhere. I haven't seen it do that, but there are times where the community wants something, the school board wants something, and we don't have a volunteer to run a club. And so we go out and we kind of ask people, and we say, look, we can pay you up to this amount because that's what's been okayed if we can gather that much tax credit money. And then that's why it happens after the fact. Sometimes we have to get things rolling with $0, and that's just part of what we try to do. So from that standpoint, there's two kind of different things that occur, and then they do go through MOM, and if there's anything that pops up that's looks like it doesn't make sense or it's an outlier, that conversation occurs right away. And then there are other times, like we'll get something, like we'll get a grant, and the grant will dictate how much we can pay per hour for tutoring. And that grant may say we could pay $35 or $40 an hour because we received that, when what we normally pay is $20. And so we're having conversations to see, can we raise that? Because right now we pay $20 an hour. But if we get a grant from somewhere and that grant says $40 an hour, we try to make it very clear that this is being paid through the grant, but only as long as the grant lasts. And we know that it's not fair, but we don't want to turn away money and not pay teachers 40 hours, because we'd love to pay them 40 hours, but we only pay them 20 hours in Higley. The grant would pay them 40. And that happened last year, and that was something that, I don't remember if it was 40 or 35, but it was something like that, wasn't it? Yeah, so those things do occur. So I think some of the conversation is maybe a little hypothetical, and we do monitor this with integrity, and we do trust our principals. That's why we hire our principals to monitor these things. If something does pop and there's an irregularity, we're on it with a conversation right away to find out why. And yeah, we do make mistakes.
I guess, not to interrupt, but here's an example where it went out to the staff and they're being offered this dollar amount and not one person knows about it. That's not okay with me. That makes me feel like the teacher that are reading those are feeling very invalued if somebody can plan a one-night event for $1,000. And I'm not trying to blame this on just one person or anything like that, but that represents us too, and I get that feedback in the community. So those are the kind of things I want to prevent from happening, I guess, and that's what I think Mrs. Reese is talking about too, is that I don't want to be reactive to this. I want to be proactive and make sure that we don't do those kind of things.
And
to
President Reese, members of the board,
our
what I would have to say about that is that does have to come to our attention. I have to know about that. If I don't know about that, and I have no idea what this international stipend is for, I have no idea what it's about, it has to be brought to my attention. And then, believe me, I would take it to the appropriate assistant superintendent's attention to deal with that individual at the site level. To me, it's absolutely absurd that we're paying somebody $1,000 for a one-night. I'm not sure that that we have that information 100% correct, or maybe there was an extra zero added, or I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but we do have to get to the bottom of that. And so, but I need the information so I can get to the bottom of that.
You know, that takes us back to the conversation. I appreciate what you're saying, but it seems so que sera. We hear about it. This is what's going on. It's brought to our attention. There isn't anybody in charge here in reference to my stipends, that the money's coming back and forth again. It takes me back to this gatekeeper. I mean, who's, is it you or is it Mrs. Richardson? I don't know. I mean, but where's the buck stop here in this decision-making process, and so that it's equitable? That's my question. It seems to be here. It's very que sera here this evening in reference to that.
Well, and I want to make something clear, and if I'm speaking out of turn for anyone, let me know. I don't think I am, I think this board is fully supportive of compensating our teachers for the above and beyond and the stipends. And so I want to make it clear that the conversation we're having here is not about giving stipends or paying our teachers for the additional work that they're doing that we can pay for. And I think that this board recognizes, like Dr. Thomason has said, we have teachers who do these things and who will sit there and tutor and not ask for 1 penny, and will never receive a stipend, and will spend hours upon hours with their students because that's what they want to do. That's what they feel is right. That's what's in their heart. And we know that. And we're very blessed and thankful for them because, like Dr. Thomason said, if we paid everybody, including you guys, I mean, you guys are salaried employees, so you can put in hours upon hours upon hours and not make a dime more. If we paid everybody what they were worth and we paid them for the time they put in, we would have zero. I mean, there's just not enough money in the world. So I just want to make that clear because it somewhat felt like this conversation's going like the board is having an issue with stipends, and that's not what it is. And I think what our conversation has said, if whatever this is out there is a grant for something specific, I think it needs to be presented as such and not, hey, who wants to earn a stipend for a one-night event? And I agree with you because here you're trying to change the terminology we're using versus stipend and supplemental, and when, like you said, for grants with tutoring, and I think that needs to be very clear. We've received this grant, and this money is here, and so maybe using, as we shift and continue to grow and change some things, separating out that terminology, so whatever words are used, people would be like, okay, that's not normal. That's not our normal tutoring rate. So just so that there's a difference, and I get that we have growing to do for sure. But I think that part of this conversation is that perhaps that through conversation is that there may be some stipends that are being offered that are specialized or that are being paid at a higher rate than others. I'm sorry, I have to come back to, sorry, Dr. I have to come back to band. They have 2 seasons. They have marching season in the fall, and they have winter and drumline in the winter and spring. Our band directors are paid a stipend for 1 season. They're only paid once, and they have 2 seasons. It's different kids. Some kids may interchange, but kids come in and out. It's not a year-long sport. There's 2 seasons. They're very different. But we choose to pay our band directors 1 stipend for 1 season. And that's an issue with me. Cheer, we've had this conversation. Cheer, they kind of technically have 3 seasons. They cheer for football, they have their own competitive season, and they cheer for basketball. They're not compensated for that. And I think I know for me, that's where this stipend conversation goes, is that I know we can't compensate everybody for every hour that they provide, and we appreciate that. But in my opinion, that is, and that's just what I know of. I mean, I don't know how much, I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know how much of these other things occur. But to me, that's an issue. Because, like Mr. Ratovich was saying, through the Fine Arts Festival, these people who are giving us this, the kindness of their heart, go away. They leave us. What happens to those? Our cheer is very competitive. Our marching band is very competitive. Our winter guards, Mrs. Kaler and I talked about this. Winter season is not funded for our coaches. They're not. And yet, Higley continues to dominate our winter season. We continue to have the largest showing in the state with our winter. We have more than 20 teams compete. More than 20 teams compete. Not one of them is compensated from the district. Not one. They are compensated by parents. So that's where my stipend piece comes in, and I think that that's something that needs to be looked at. We put on this amazing Fine Arts Festival, and it has continued to grow. You guys know, you work a lot of hours in there, and it's huge, and it's continued to become a huge community event. We're not compensating, and it's not just you guys that are putting the time in. Our teachers are doing it. And I also want to make it clear, there are certain expectations. I don't think a teacher should receive a stipend. If you're a choir teacher and you're putting on choir performances as part of your class, I don't think that receives a stipend. That's part of your regular duties, and that is a concert. But these art teachers aren't just displaying their art. They're going way above and beyond. And those are just some specific examples, and that's where my concern comes in regarding stipends. And then when there's no monitoring of it, that's kind of where I'm at. And it seemed like the conversation was going on that we're not supportive of stipends, and I think I believe we are fully supportive, and if we could do more, we would do more. Mrs. Kaler's comment about being fair, I agree. Everything's not always going to be fair, but I'm not going to talk about fair. I'm going to talk about what's right is right. It's not a matter of being fair. It's a matter of what's right is right. So that's my 2 cents on stipends. Sorry.
President Reese, members of the board, I would like to take us back about 6 years to tell you where we got where we are with our stipends. At that time, we still had the same issues. The same thing the board was talking about tonight is what we talked about 5 or 6 years ago. We did do a Southeast Maricopa County study on stipends for Mesa, Gilbert, Queen Creek, Chandler, and Higley. And at that time, we based our stipends right in the middle. We are higher than some districts. We are lower than other districts. Okay, but that's how we got where we are with our stipends for arts and athletics. The other elementary stipends, that's a separate issue on that. But to let you know, for band and for football and for all those clubs and activities at the middle schools and high schools, we did meet in the middle. Sounds like we need to go out and do a study again and bring that back to the board. And I do believe that being somewhere right in the middle would be an appropriate aspect for the Higley Unified School District.
Sure, Dr. Thomason. I mean, when I hear President Reese mention about, the payment of the band and Winter Guard and all these other things, what's going through my brain is like, who made that decision? I mean, that brings me back to the gatekeeper again. Who's calling the shots here? And
President Reese, members of the board, at that time, 6 years ago, the study was done, and it was brought to the board, and the board did approve those. So that was brought directly to the board for the stipends that we have. We have added, thank you, board, for adding quite a few more stipends since that time 6 years ago, but at that time it was brought to the board. We were average for the Southeast Valley across the board for all athletics, arts, and extra clubs.
President Reese, I would like to know, I would like a study on that and to see where we are now, because 6 years is a big change. And I would like to know where we are sitting.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot that's changed over 6 years, and I'm just going to say, Higley has grown so much, and I would be interested to see that because I want us to be competitive. But I'm just going to go back to right is right. And just because another district may or may not do it doesn't mean we should or should not do it. I think we need to evaluate ourselves and do what's right by our employees. Obviously, we have financial constraints, but we keep talking about Chandler, Gilbert, what they may do, what they may not do. I can only speak to what I know. For sports, we're comparing to a Chandler, but their team may be 1.5 times our size, or things like that. I think it's good to do a study. I agree, and I think that we should find out so we are competitive with our neighbors, absolutely, because we compete for these same people. But I think that as we move forward, we just kind of, as a cabinet and as an administrative team, I think that we just kind of have to ask ourselves those questions. And what do we want to do? Where do we want to go? Where do we want Higley to be? And how do we want to stand out? Because we know it's not always about the same amount, but it's how we value them and treat them. So,
President Reese, members of the board, also just a general reminder too that 4 years ago we did pay all of our head athletic and arts stipends through tax credit. We have absorbed that within our own budget now at this time. So I think it's important to recognize the board for us moving forward just within the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
absolutely, and I know Mr. Glover wants to get in here, but I was part of that conversation, and I was part of that board, and I agree, and we had to react to our economy at the time and where we are, and we still have to be financially aware, and I'm not saying throw that out the window. Trust me, that's not what I'm saying. But we've moved forward, and we're in a different place, and paying, we also learned that wasn't a very good idea. We learned that really quick, paying all of our stipends out of tax credits, and I'm glad our district's in a better financial position to have taken that back, and so our tax credits can be used really for what they need to be and everything. So I agree with you. We were in a very bad place with stipends and compensating our teachers and our athletic coaches and everything. We were in a very bad place 4 to 6 years ago, and we still had amazing athletics, and we still had amazing arts programs, and they got next to nothing. So when I look back at where we were and where we are now, I will not disagree. We are in a much better spot. But I think we can continue to grow differently. So, and I know Mr. Glover's been wanting to jump in here.
I was listening too, though. Thank you for your comments, and everybody. So I think, we are painting somewhat, it seems like a bleak picture, but I think by and large, things are pretty good. And I think actually we're mostly all on the same side about things. American schools just offer more things than our international counterparts, and that costs money. So as more district additional assistance fund rolls in and funding gets restored. I think Mr. Holland would appreciate this comment, and I wrote it down early on. The things that we can be consistent about with regard to stipends, then we should be consistent about. You know, if there's a school that has, you know, a teacher wants to start a book club or a chess club or something that isn't offered at all schools, I agree with you. We should give them the autonomy to do that. But if it's something that's good and worthwhile for everybody and it can be supported and grow, and then maybe that moves away from the tax credits into this sheet I was talking about that we all want to see that like that. So that chart would help. I'm not sure if we need a study or more meet and confer to just have people talk about, you know, is band really a 3-sport thing or not? Yeah, I'm not sure you totally need that, but because I don't. But okay, you can. That's fine. I don't need to dictate that. But I'm saying you should involve some of the people and just ask them. Look, football coach, do you think that cheerleaders that do 3 sports? I mean, I think we have the answers here. But anyway, I'm okay with these things for tax credits, and I understand the difference between tax credits and having clubs. So as things become more consistent, and if chess is a popular thing at elementaries to offer, then perhaps we do make it something that's part of an annual budget. And I'm glad people are keeping an eye on things. I think years ago it was the Wild West, and if I like you, you get a lot more. I think if you are starting a club, let's say that's a book club that meets once a month, it really shouldn't be paid more than X. We should know what that number sort of is as a guideline, and I think it would help the principals. And if it's wildly popular and you have 300 kids attending a club, I think that's different than 10, but still, a club is a club. So anyway, that chart will help. And so, again, it sounds like we're doing a terrible job, and I don't think we are. We've come a long way, and we're getting very consistent, and I think we all just want, on behalf of our teachers, for them to have some consistency, and for the kids. And I really like hearing that we value paying teachers for doing work. Teachers would probably work. They would work for free, but I'm glad we're in a position we don't have to worry about that as much as we once did. So that's all. Thank you.
I would just like to say I agree with what Mrs. Wilson said this evening in reference to maybe perhaps we should look at this, but again, I don't want us to look at our neighbors, please, okay? I want us to look on some state and national things. I want people in other districts in Gilbert and Chandler to say, let's look at what Higley's doing. They're quite an innovative school district. I think we need to
I can just tell you, we can't afford Texas football.
That's okay. I understand. And I know they're cheering their band and all that, but let's just see what some trends are taking place. I don't want to know what my neighbor's doing here. I want to see what some other things are taking place. So when you do ask those questions, let's take a look at some of these things like that.
Certainly, and we'll do that. We'll take a look not only within our East Valley and the Phoenix metropolitan area, but we can look above and beyond. I'm part of a national organization where I can gather some of that data. But if you allow me to say this, what I'd like to also say is don't hesitate to let us know. Going back to what I've said before in the past about performance behavior, we can't correct when we don't know when the issue is. So I think sometimes maybe you're more in tune to things than we are, as Dr. Mallory and I think Ms. Richards has said. We rely on our principals and our site administration to do based on, again, what carries out our mission, vision, values, and the things that we have. And if somebody's this might be a grant opportunity. I'm not saying that that's not that, but if something does raise alarms on your end and we're not aware of it, please do help us, because we can't address something we don't know.
And I love that, and I absolutely, but when something comes out to our teachers, I assume, and I know you're not supposed to do that everybody knows. So that's my issue too, where I'm like, oh, well, everybody should have known.
I think that's a reasonable comment to make too, absolutely. So we've got some work to do, and we'll address it, and I'll follow up with Dr. Thomason in getting the board the information that you're requesting. Thank you.
Thank you for putting that together and having this conversation.
Absolutely.
So. Okay. Anything else on stipends? I think we kind of covered that. All right, we will go on to 9.3. I move that we approve the amendment of policy GDD, support staff vacation and holidays.
Support.
And my understanding as I read it, Ms. Good, this has been an approved amendment. It did not get filed correctly, if you will, and now we can't get it on the ASBA because it didn't get filed back then, and it's been so long since it was approved. So there's no change in the policy, they just need a new date. Any questions or comments regarding the policy? Mr. Glover.
Sorry. It's just a clarification because I was talking to Dr. Thomas, and so I read this and I was thinking this is like vacation and holidays and sick time and all that stuff. But those are two separate things. You have sick time, and one of the benefits, Dr. Thomason, please correct me if I'm misstating this or not being clear. Sometimes when people have accrued, support staff accrue vacation and holidays, and it is a work period, like let's say maybe Christmas, and they're not typically paid. They can roll over some of these hours, right, and use it for that. It's a good thing. So.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Weber.
Okay. I don't know if anybody has any other comments.
Any other comments? No. All right. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Aye. All right, that motion carries 5-0. I know. You're so far away. All right, so now we'll go on to our future agenda items. Like Dr. Thomason said, we do have a work study coming up, and it will include a technology update at the end of the month. We have a, what did you say, Mrs. Kaler, earlier?
Field trip.
A field trip work study coming up.
Information.
Any other items? Mr. Glover.
Well, this is, thank you, Madam President. This is just something I've been thinking about more and more, and I think we all have our own sort of take on this. So I just want to know if this is something you guys would be interested in. So it's just about how much time and effort and energy and emphasis we're placing on standardized testing. So school boards, for those who don't know, they hire the superintendent, they set budget, or they pass a budget and they set policy. But one thing I think American education in general is overdone, and I think it's time to sort of look at, is how much time we actually spend on these testing. It's a high level of stress, so I don't want to. How much time we're dedicating to these things, I would like to sort of know and talk about, and if we need to develop a policy about that, then maybe we can. But elementary, middle school, high school levels, how much time, energy, all that, and the teachers feels that that's worthwhile. Something to that effect. So your thoughts, if that's worth talking about.
Mr. Glover, I just had a conversation with Dr. Thomason about our Galileo and finals, and I was going to have a kind of an information meeting. So maybe that's something that we could put together, and if that's something the board would like to hear about in the future, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, we can either, because of our new format, which I love, by the way, but sometimes we are restrictive in work study, but nothing prevents us from adding it to any meeting as an informational item, just like our stipends. With an informational item, we are permitted to have conversation and ask questions, so that it may be a good start to gather the information and have it presented at a informational, as an informational item on an agenda, unless we have some time in a work study coming up. And then if we need to place it on an agenda, future agenda for further discussion and a vote for whatever it may be, we can do that at that time.
President Reese, members of the board, what I'm hearing that the board would like would be a work study or an informational item on standardized testing and requirements from the state and district level, and as far as the time requirements and what is required at each grade level?
Yes, and expense, and if the teachers feel it's valued, some input from our stakeholders. Over the years, we've just continued to add more and more stuff, and we rarely take things away, and it might be an opportunity to take some things away and say, this duplicates this, but we just kept, adding things. So I think anyway, I hope something, I'm glad you guys are supportive of that, so hopefully we can make some progress.
President Reese, members of the board, will get that put on the future work or future agenda items.
President Reese, in reference to our next work study session, I would appreciate if this is an important topic that we see that this is the main topic for our work study, and we don't have, unless there's something urgent, other discussions at that work study. So if we could, that could be the main conversation.
I believe that is the main topic.
President Reese, members of the board, we do have 3 topics for that night. That would be January 30th, the technology update. We also have a timely aspect for board members, and especially if we have a new board member, of the conflicts of interest requirements and roles and responsibilities of board members too. If the board so wishes, we can move some of those around.
We've waited quite a lengthy amount of time in reference to this presentation. I think we need to have some time allotted for this. Adequate time, please.
No, I agree, and I think the other 2 items are, I don't want to say minimal, but they're not going to be a real involved, time-consuming topics. I don't see them as that. If I'm mistaking the conflict of interest and the roles and responsibilities of board members, I don't see that taking a lot of time. Am I wrong, Mrs. Good?
No, it doesn't have to take too long. I can talk forever, or I can talk for just a short period of time.
I think, obviously we want to cover that. We have Mrs. Wilson, who's new, and I think that would be fine. But I believe that the majority of our time will be consumed in the technology update, and I don't think that will be conflicting. I think that will be, yes, we can make sure that we prioritize that. Anything else? All right, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Have a good night.